Breaking tonight, just 1 week before America marks 13 years since the 9/11 attacks, and the U.S. Director of Counterterrorism today described what he called the alarming new threat from this terror army known as ISIS. Good evening and welcome to the Kelly File, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. Matt Olsen is the U.S. Director of Counterintelligence. He's a man who shoulders a big part of the job of keeping us safe. So when he gave a speech today describing how this group ISIS poses a growing threat to the homeland, we paid attention. Olsen described how the group has now established a safe haven the size of the United Kingdom, how it is taking in more than $1 million by selling black market oil, and how it is waging a campaign of terror at a pace that now includes 30 to 40 suicide attacks every month. In addition, hundreds of fighters loyal to this group are from Western Europe or from America, with passports to travel and the motivation to conduct lone wolf operations. On top of those remarks from Mr. Olsen, the Defense Secretary weighed in again today with a warning about the threat we face. Our Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge just filed this report.
The nation's top counterterrorism official, who's seen by Republicans and Democrats as a straight shooter, says ISIS is a direct threat to the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad and U.S. personnel on the ground in Iraq, with the potential to go global.
Left unchecked, they would turn their sights more to the West and potentially to the United States.
With more than 10,000 fighters and territory the size of Great Britain, social media fuels ISIS recruitment. The execution videos of American journalists James Foley and Steven Sotloff show no terrorist group is more adept at spreading these graphic images at lightning speed. And based on new analysis and obvious details such as facial hair, the State Department said today the two American journalists were murdered on different days.
We've already determined that the videos were not shot at the same time, with the video of Mr. Sotloff being filmed after the Foley video.
With a 22-year-old Florida man who traveled back and forth from the U.S. to Syria before making a martyrdom video and becoming a suicide bomber in May, Olsen said domestic cells are a real possibility.
No indication at this point of a cell of foreign fighters operating in the United States. So, full stop. We're mindful and, vigilant about the possibility of individuals more likely on their own, 1, 2, coming back from Syria.
There was no comment today on reports that an ISIS fighter once worked at the Minneapolis International Airport with a job that gave him access to secure areas, including planes and the tarmac. Megyn?
Catherine Herridge, thank you. Joining me now, Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Peters, who's a Fox News strategic analyst. Ralph, the president's messaging was all over the board today on this, and meantime, his counterterrorism head, his defense secretary, his chairman of the Joint Chiefs, all seem to be telling us the same thing, which is, yes, we do need to worry.
Well, Megyn, I believe the president has isolated himself from his own allies at this point. For the intelligence community, sort of a final straw was when he tried to blame them for not alerting him about ISIS, when the intelligence community knows full well it's been doing all it could for well over a year to tell the president that, hey, they're coming and they're serious. And even Chuck Hagel, who's certainly been, when not a cipher, very loyal to Obama, he clearly gets it. Throughout the government, you've got people that see this as a very serious threat. They're trying to be loyal to the president, but they're finding they just can't be because this guy doesn't get it. And, today was another debacle where he said, Obama sounds strong, and then he backs off and says, well, we just got to get this to a manageable level with Islamic State Caliphate. You can't manage hardcore fanatical terrorists. It's like trying to manage a barrel of rattlesnakes, for God's sakes. And then, God help us, you had Joe Biden ranting about how we'll follow ISIS to the gates of hell. We won't even cross the border into Syria. And this is an administration that relies on rhetoric for everything. And Megyn, it struck me today that one thing, President Obama and Vladimir Putin do have one thing in common. You can't pay any attention to what they say, watch what they do, or, in our president's case, what he fails to do.
Here's the thing that I think concerns a lot of Americans. The messaging, it's all over the board. That's clear. They give us a different message every day, and it depends on who. Even the president is giving us a different message every day. But his counterterrorism officials and those who are supposed to be keeping us safe, they seem to be sticking to be concerned, be very concerned. Then we see them get woodshedded a little bit behind, closed doors by the White House, and they come out, they soften it a little, and then they once again go back to what appears to be their truth, which is be concerned. The thing that I think a lot of Americans are worried about, Ralph, is what is the truth? I mean, we're coming up on the 9/11, the 13-year mark from the 9/11 attacks. What is the truth? And does the president have a truth that he believes about this group?
Well, that's the last question you ask is impossible for us to know, because none of us can really get inside this president's head. My personal view is that he has a deep psychological aversion to bearing responsibility, to making any decisions. But as far as what's the truth about ISIS and the threat on the anniversary of 9/11, what we do know is they want desperately to hit us. Islamist terrorists all want to hit us, and there's no better day than the anniversary of 9/11. On the other hand, our government doesn't get credit when it does deserve it. Our counter-terrorist forces are elements from Homeland Security, the intelligence community, to New York City cops, have done a remarkable job of keeping us safe. But the threat is growing. It is metastasizing, and our president is doing nothing. And at some point, even the best efforts of New York's finest are not going to be able to prevent that horrible attack.
Ralph, thank you. Also with us now, Larry Korb, who's a former Assistant Secretary of Defense and a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress. Larry, let me start with Ralph's last point. Is that fair that the president is doing nothing? Because we heard Charles Krauthammer say virtually the same thing yesterday.
No, I think he's done a lot. He stopped the advance of ISIS in Iraq. In fact, he's rolled them back. He's starting to get a coalition together of the Sunni countries in the region to work together. He's got contributions from the British, the French, and the Germans. He's starting to arm the Peshmerga, the Kurdish security forces. And he's just, helped to liberate Amiril. So he is making, I think, an awful lot of progress. And in the long term, basically, we're not going to defeat this group unless we get an international coalition together so you can undermine their ideology. You can't kill your way out of this. You've got to convince people who might be attracted to them that that's not the way to go.
That's not what Ralph says. I mean, he says the only way to get out of this is to kill your way out of it, that these people can't be reasoned with. What, are we going to go over there and try to persuade them that their interpretation of Islam is incorrect and they should do what the former radical jihadist I had on the program the other night did and run for office instead?
No, I think, and again, if you ask Ralph about Mr. Olson's comment, he said they're not a threat like Al-Qaeda was, and we're much better prepared. You had Duncan Hunter on your show a couple of weeks ago, and he said they're not a threat to the homeland, so we can take our time.
No, but then
and
we had Dempsey saying they are an immediate threat, which, I listen to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs more than I listen to any of those guys.
Well, basically, they're lone wolves are a threat, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff said you got to build a coalition, and you're not going to win it militarily. What you have to do, basically, you don't want people to keep joining them. And if you look at where they were a month ago compared to where they are now, they're not in as good a shape, particularly in Iraq.
Here's what I want to ask you. Put politics aside. What do you believe? What more do you believe we should be doing? Forget elections, forget the left versus the right. This is America on the precipice of going over with a bombing campaign against perhaps the worst terror group we've seen ever in our history, according to the officials. The risks are enormous if we do it and if we don't do it. What do you believe we should do?
Well, I think, again,
coalition, I get it, but what do we do with our coalition?
Well, basically, you keep the attacks up where you have the ground forces to support. Don't forget, Obama just sent 300 more military people there. We have over 1,000 people on the ground who are working with those forces. Now, when you get to Syria, the question you have to ask is, who are your allies in there? People say, well, let's start bombing Syria. That's going to help Assad. Is that really what you want to do? Or do you want to take your time and get a force in there? The president asked for $500 million to help the Free Syrian Army. The Congress hasn't even appropriated it yet.
You know what, Larry? He had an opportunity to do something in Syria a long time ago, and he declined. He declined when that civil war was ramping up and when the extremists had not yet fully integrated the opposition, and he declined when he said they would cross a red line and he'd intervene, and he didn't.
No,
Two big missed opportunities in Syria.
No, he did not, because back then they were not ready to get it. And in fact, a lot of the people who were in the Free Syrian Army went over to fight with the Islamists.
All right, I got to leave it at that. Larry, good to see you. With warnings that this terrorist group wants to target the United States, we are investigating reports tonight that thousands of foreign nationals in the U.S. have vanished. They are off the official radar screen, and we don't know where they are. That's not good. Congressman Peter King is here on that. Plus, we have new details tonight about the second known American killed while fighting alongside ISIS, and how he was working for years at a major U.S. airport with access to the planes. And then, what is the Department of Justice doing to track down the young men inside the United States who are actively being recruited by the terrorists? The answer to that just ahead.
You've seen dozens, some reports upwards of 40 Minnesotans from Minneapolis, the same area in Minneapolis, the West Bank area, all making their way through Turkey into Syria to fight with ISIS.